It starts out with, you start hearing voices periodically, then you think, oh, that's a hallucination. Then you come to and they go away, so you're convinced it's a hallucination. Then one day they don't. They're there permanently. There's not a single test anywhere to validate any of them. No lab work, no EEG, no EKG, nothing.
Jerry is a retired licensed psychotherapist with over 35 years experience.
Nobody was curious about the voices that they were hearing. They didn't want anything to do with religion. If the patient read the 23rd Psalm, they went nuts.
Jerry, how are you, sir?
Doing good. Glad to be on with you, Chris.
But Jerry is a retired licensed psychotherapist with over 35 years experience working with and studying the thought processes of schizophrenic and criminally insane patients in some of the most volatile psychiatric institutions in the great American nation. He was awarded the state of Arizona's Meritorious Service Award and given the Apple Award as an instructor of abnormal psychology. His formal academic training comprises of a BA in psychology, a master's degree in counseling, and Jerry studied 2 years in a PhD psychology program. So, he's also the author of An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind. I remember I was in a thread, some comment, or maybe it was a YouTube video that I'd done, and I was explaining why I thought I'd got ill. And I thought I'd basically overloaded the synapses in my brain with this chemical, and they started misfiring, basically. And somebody came in the chat and went, "No, Chris, basically don't fall for that one. You'd open yourself up to demons." He actually called them jinn being the Asian word for spirit based, bad, dark spirit. And I remember reading that. It was the first time, Jerry, I'd come across this concept. But now, because I've had my sort of challenges with substance misuse a lot of my life, and I got to the point where every time I relapsed, I just thought, devil's got me again. He gets it. If you lower your guard, before you know it, he's made himself a home in your head again, and you've got to then go through all the steps to exorcise him. So,
yeah, meth will do that. When I was working in the prison psychology department, there were scores of prisoners who had gone psychotic on meth. I mean, they called it the devil's drug. And they were just as psychotic as people who were crazy from other causes. I mean, it starts out with, you start hearing voices periodically, then you think, oh, that's a hallucination. Then you come to and they go away. So you're convinced it's a hallucination. Then one day they don't. They're there permanently. And when I worked in virtually every mental health facility that the United States has. I worked at one of the biggest psychiatric hospitals on the planet, Central State. There were 10,000 patients there when I got there. And these are all places that the normal person can't access, and even worse, researchers can't access. So if they're looking for the truth, it lies in these institutions. It doesn't lie in the educational institutions or the labs that these highfalutin PhDs are publishing. They're influenced by big pharma, who's taken over the American health system since 1910 with the Flexner Report, and made it a law that they only teach pharmaceutical medicine. And that includes you know, medical and psychiatric. So they knocked out all the other treatments then, electrical treatment, uh, naturopathy, spiritual they knocked out everything. They basically said the system has to, and this was Rockefeller, said they have to function around a physiological, uh, drug-centered health treatment program. So of course, that's a point where big pharma took over the whole health system in the United States and throughout the planet. See, I didn't know that when I went to school. I had no idea. And I spent 4 years in undergraduate psychology and 4 years in graduate school studying psychology and counseling. And I was looking for answers like what causes mental illness? I didn't see any. I saw these grand descriptions of mental illness with all these numbers and detailed descriptions of all these different mental illnesses. And it looked impressive in their DSM, the psychiatry's Bible. I didn't know at the time, and they certainly hid it from us, that every single one of those diagnoses were made up. There's not a single test anywhere to validate any of them. No lab work, no EEG, no EKG, nothing. They're completely made up. And they're made up by psychiatrists that meet periodically and make up new mental illnesses to put in there. Those things started with, just a few, and now they're up to almost 300. And it's a scam. It makes it look like they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, they never come forward with a holistic approach for any illness, do they? It's always straight to either the medicine or straight to an operation.
And what they do to even worse than that is, they started off. They always have to look like they know what's causing mental illness, and they don't. They have no idea. They're not even in the ballpark. So they started out blaming mothers back in the 50s. Well, the mothers treated the kids wrong, or they did something, but that was observable. The mothers go, well, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. I mean, what? I wouldn't beat my kid. I wouldn't do it. So that was observable. So they moved it up to genetics. They said, oh, there's a genetic malabsorption. So they moved it out of the place where it could be verified into a genetics lab where psychiatrists, psychologists, the normal population couldn't verify anything. They're saying, oh, it's in this mysterious gene thing. And that's what's causing schizophrenia and mental illness. That went on for years until some, honest geneticist says, hey, we can't find anything. There are no markers. There's nothing there, and so they had to change it. So back in the 70s, when Eli Lilly came out with Prozac, they go, oh, well, it must be a chemical imbalance. So we give these people antidepressants and they seem to feel better for a little while. And so it's got to be a chemical imbalance. So they came up with this serotonin theory of lack of serotonin, and they have using serotonin blockers and all this stuff. It's got nothing to do with that. So it took them a good while to come up with the fact that it's got nothing to do with a chemical imbalance. Matter of fact, these people don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain and the neurotransmitters should be. It was completely fabricated. They knew it was a lie at the time. I ran into it when I got to the big state hospital. There were 10,000 patients there at the time. This place was the size of a city. They had every mental illness known to man in there. And I started getting curious about schizophrenics because they acted the strangest of all. And nobody was curious about the voices that they were hearing. It was like, what are they hearing? And they were doing all these things to sabotage themselves. They were causing all these strange problems, and they would say the voices. But the psychiatrists were insisting that these voices were hallucinations and that they should ignore them. So they ignored them until the patient told the psychiatrist that the voices were telling them to kill themselves. And then they acted like pigs stuck with a hot rod, and they grabbed the person, threw him on suicide watch, and locked him down with nothing that he could hurt himself with, drugged him silly, and didn't let him out of there until he said he was suicidal. So all of a sudden they changed their mind. If the voices are telling them that they're to kill themselves, all of a sudden they're very real, but otherwise they're hallucinations.
Mm.
You know, I remember sitting in a psychiatrist's office with one of my patients once, and the patient was complaining of hearing voices. Psychiatrist said, "They're hallucinations. I'll increase your meds. Just ignore them." I called that guy back a week later and I said, "How's that going for you?" He said, "Awful. It's not working. The voices got louder when I tried to ignore them, you know, and the medications didn't stop them." So for the vast majority of these patients, those drugs drug them up. They feel doped up, but it doesn't stop the voices. You know, they're still hearing them.
Mm.
Now, what were the voices? You know, nobody seemed to know. Everybody was brainwashed in graduate school or nursing school, whatever school they came to, with the big pharma explanation that these things were hallucinations due to a chemical brain imbalance. So when I first started seeing a crack in that, I mean, on the front lines, I'm watching how the psychiatrists work. You know, so they say it's a chemical imbalance. It has to be balanced with their drugs. You know, okay, fine. But I noticed that never did they ever give a baseline or take a baseline of what was the imbalance in the first place. You know, what is out of balance and by how much? There's something like 23 different neurotransmitters in the brain. Which one of them are out of balance? Which chemicals are out of balance by how much? They never gave any kind of lab test, you know, EKG, EEG, no kind of test whatsoever before they started prescribing these drugs. It was almost like going to a dartboard and they'd go, "Well, I think we'll start with this one and then we'll just keep increasing or decreasing or moving the drugs until we get something that works."
Mm-hmm.
You know, so this chemical imbalance thing was a lie perpetrated on the public to make the public believe that their drugs were actually doing something. Those drugs don't work. They're basically tranquilizers that sedate, you know, mentally ill patients and keep them under control. That's it. You know, so when they first invented them, they were like a miracle drug because now they didn't have to wrestle patients into straitjackets. They could drug them silly with these drugs and, you know, not worry about it. You know, so they could reduce their staff. There wasn't as much violence. There wasn't people getting hurt. And they were able to manage more people with less staff. So that left it like, okay, so what's the deal with this chemical imbalance thing? So the more I looked into it, it's like they don't even have any idea what the chemical balance of the brain should be. None. This was a complete fabricated lie, you know, to sell drugs by Eli Lilly. And so was their DSM. Their DSM, you look at it, and here's these highfalutin, big-worded psychobabble descriptions of these different illnesses, you know, starting out with these big detailed descriptions and then sub-descriptions and then numbers and all that kind of stuff. It looks like they know what they're talking about. It looks like they know what the cause of it is. They don't know the cause of any of those mental illnesses. None of them. They just give drugs. So what happens is 2/3 of the people that fabricated that DSM, that Bible of psychiatry, were on board with the drug companies. So what was happening is they'd make up these mental illnesses, including something like, Southern Bell syndrome. There was one called Paris syndrome that happened to Japanese when they visited Paris and got cultural shock, and they called it a mental illness. They used to call homosexual a mental illness. So what they do is they vote these things in and they vote them out. And I heard one report that these meetings were like a tobacco barn. A psychiatrist would come in and, "Hey, I got a new mental illness," and they listen to it and they go, "Oh yeah, can we sell drugs with it?" And they vote them in, they vote them out. You know, there's no test for any of those mental illnesses, none. So that whole DSM is fabricated. It's all subjective. And if you put 10 psychiatrists in a room and you give them, even a middling difficult diagnosis, you'll have, 6 different diagnoses from them. There is no standardization for these things. They're subjective descriptions of pieces of behavior that they've pathologized. You know, so yeah, that was another fraud. This SMI scam. So they're calling these people seriously mentally ill, and they drugging them. Okay, they don't ever ask what the voices are saying. And when I was at the state hospital, I started asking them, "What are these things telling you? What are these voices telling you?" Because they were affecting how they were behaving. You know, they were doing weird stuff. One thing they were doing was they stopped taking their meds. Why are they stop taking their meds? If they know they're going to go psychotic, why are they stop taking their meds? But virtually all of them did that at some point. So I did this survey. I got all the symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia, printed them on a sheet, and I'd bring the people who stopped taking their meds in, and I'd say, why'd you stop taking your meds? The normal excuse was, well, the side effects. Well, the side effects are horrible. Dry mouth, blurry eyes, you can't think straight, you feel drugged. They're awful. They're toxic side effects. They're poisonous side effects. They're nasty side effects caused by the drugs. Now, what we didn't know at the time was that those drugs actually, the phenothiazines, actually rot out the brain and the central nervous system with long enough use. And when they found that happening with autopsies of long-term mental health patients, and they published that, the psychiatric mafia and big pharma went nuts. Oh no, it's not our drugs. It's not our drugs. It's the schizophrenia doing it. And they went with that. But these, thank God, there's some honest people in academia. They started feeding those phenothiazines to rats, mice, and monkeys, and found that with long enough use, it shrunk their brains. It rotted out their peripheral nervous systems. It was doing physiological damage, and they're feeding these things to kids right now by the millions. There's over 1 million kids in the United States right now on all these drugs, with something like 700,000 of them on antipsychotic drugs that are rotting out their brains. These people don't care about the damage they're doing, and never have I seen a psychiatrist sit down and explain to the patient how dangerous these drugs are. Antipsychotics are some of the most dangerous drugs being used in the health system today. They never tell the patient how dangerous they are, ever. It's amazing they get along with that. So, I started asking these patients, what are these voices telling you? And it took a good while to get them to trust, because what happens if they complain about their voices, the psychiatrist just drugs them more until they're just zombies. So they learn on their own not to tell psych people about their drug or their voices, because they get drugged and they get locked down. And so it took a while for them to start telling me what these things were doing. And I saw the first pattern I saw was that they were consistently negative. They never said anything positive. They would tell the patient, "You're ugly, you're stupid, you're ridiculous, everybody hates you, everything under the sun." But it was always negative. So I went, well, what holds it on such a negative path? Why isn't it normally distributed like a regular hallucination would be? They're all over the place. Some are positive, some are negative. Some are goofy. They're just all over the place. These things were consistently negative. What held them on such a consistent negative path? Something did. What was it? So I started asking them what they were telling them. And when the psychiatrist found that out, I got pulled up to the psychiatrist's office and told them, "You will not ask them about the voices. They are hallucinations. What you're doing is making my patients worse by reinforcing their hallucinations." And I already knew well past that point that I wasn't making them worse at all, because I'd been doing it for a good while before I got caught. But 2 psychiatrists at that state hospital told me not to ask the patients questions about what their voices were or what they were saying to them, because I was reinforcing their hallucinations. That was such bullcrap, I couldn't believe it. So I had to be real careful there, because psychiatrists were being assaulted by schizophrenics at a rate of, like more than double that anybody else. The psych nurses, they were being assaulted at the same rate that the attendants were being assaulted on the units. So the patients were beating the crap out of them, but they weren't attacking psychologists, they weren't attacking counselors, they weren't attacking psychiatric nurses, they were attacking psychiatrists. So I started wondering what these things were, what these voices were. I saw that they started running patterns. The second pattern I saw was that they were anti-religious. They didn't want anything to do with religion. If the patient read the 23rd Psalm, they went nuts. Patients told me that the voices reacted to the 23rd Psalm like throwing worms on a hot frying pan.
What is, Jerry, can you enlighten us? What is the 23rd Psalm? What's the basis of it?
Well, that's the one that said, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want."
Got you.
Starts off that way.
Yeah.
They hated that. So why would a hallucination hate a psalm in the Bible? Why would they react so violently to such a psalm? So here's these patterns starting to develop. And these were consistent. They happened all the time. Hallucinations don't run patterns. So that got my curiosity up. I kept looking and asking questions. The other thing I wondered about was, why did they go off their antipsychotic drugs if the voices got louder and started taking them over? So I started asking them questions about that. So every one that went off, I would bring them in. I'd have a list of descriptions of paranoid schizophrenia, what it was like, all these subsections, it's a horrible thing. It's a nightmare. And then I'd ask them, what were the side effects you had on the drugs you were taking, the antipsychotic drugs you were taking? And I didn't, give them a list, because they all didn't have the same side effects, and they all didn't have all the side effects. So they'd write down 5 or 6 side effects that they hated, that they remembered. And then I'd take that and I'd give them the list of psychotic symptoms, and I'd say, which one's worse? I did that to scores of them, like 50 or 100. Which one's worse? The answer was consistently, well, the psychosis is worse. The voices are worse. It's horrible. I mean, the side effects are awful, but you're talking about an absolute nightmare with the psychosis. All of them said the psychosis was worse. And then I'd ask them, well, why'd you stop taking your drugs? Guess what their answer was? I don't know. It took 3 years to get past that. The reason they weren't taking them, I found out from one gal that was about to get thrown out of the program we had because she wasn't taking her medicines. She said the voices were telling me that the psychiatrist was poisoning me, and that's why they were being assaulted. And actually, they are being poisoned. Those drugs are toxic.
If these voices are, manifestation of, let's just call it evil, you'd think they'd say to the patient, keep taking the drug.
No, because they want the patient upset. Now, another thing they do is they suck energy out of them, but they're low frequency entities. So they want to bring the patient down and keep them down to that low frequency. Mm-hmm. It's only then that they can extract the energy. And if you talk to schizophrenics, you'll see that's a consistent pattern also. When the voices attack, their energy vanishes and they have no idea where it goes. They don't even know that it's missing. And for years, I thought it was because of the nastiness of the voices. If I heard voices screaming at me all day long, telling me I was no good and I was worthless and everybody was plotting against me, and all this nonsense, it makes sense that you would be drained, but that's not it. They actually have to keep the person upset. If the person gets to a higher vibration, they can no longer take their energy. So they're parasites. And there's a one-to-one correlation between the voices attacking these patients and their energy disappearing. The psychiatrist still saying they're hallucinations. So, they foster and create negative emotion. They energetically drain their victims. So what they did is they moved this chemical imbalance. They went from genetics into a place where nobody could observe anything, and people were blind. Other researchers were blind, other psychiatrists were blind, psychologists were blind. They couldn't see this genetic stuff. So they moved it up. Once that was disproved, they moved it into the chemical imbalance sphere, where now it required chemists and labs and that kind of stuff to disprove it. And then they bolstered that with millions of dollars worth of advertising from big pharma to push the chemical imbalance theory, and they're still pushing it. Even today, they're still pushing it, and it's a complete and utter fabricated lie. Thoughts are energy. Okay, these voices are energy. You can't see energy. Okay, you can see the effect of energy. So if you have a magnet and you have iron filings, you can put a magnet there, and then you can see the magnetic field, but you're not actually seeing the energy of the magnet itself. Same way with X-rays. You can't see them, but you can see their effect. Ultraviolet light, you can't see it, but you can see their effect. It's the same thing with these voices. You can't see them, you can't feel them, you can't. There's only one person I know who's actually got a recording of them. So it's the same thing. The patterns they run are the ones I'm talking about, and anybody can see these. So if it's running patterns, it can't be a hallucination. All right. The filings, the magnetic field, the iron filings are these patterns when it comes to the voices, because they're energetic. So they're consistently negative. They're anti-religious. They foster or create negative emotion. They energetically drain their victims. They get louder after sunset. Anybody can see these things. Anybody who's working with schizophrenics can see these things. These are patterns that they run. These are the effect of the voices. These are the iron filings for the magnet. They get louder when ignored. You can't ignore them. They foster self-destructive behavior. They foster isolation. So you'll see these schizophrenics lock themselves in the room. They don't want to talk to anybody. They don't want to deal with anybody. Everybody becomes their enemy. They demand the attention of their victims. So it's a battle for the victim's attention. They maneuver for increased control constantly. They're trying to gain more and more control. They gaslight the victim. They tell them lies. They will make the patient interpret things in the worst possible way. They manipulate perception. Now, this is really interesting. The voices are energetic. Thoughts are energetic. Memories are energetic. So they have complete access to the patient's memory. They can go into the patient's memory. They can pull up every rotten thing they ever did, and they can throw it into their mental stream of thought and just torment them with it. They demand that the victim don't tell anybody about their presence or what they're saying. They're consummate liars. You can't believe anything they say. You can't make any deals with them. They're very negative. They lie about everything. They constantly steer the victim away from any form of joy. They don't want them to be happy. They can manipulate feeling without speaking. They short circuit reason. They love the patient to be bored. They can foster selective forgetting. They want the self-destructive behavior. They pull the patient away from consensual reality. I mean, it goes on and on and on. There's a bunch of symptoms that run patterns. And if they run patterns, the voices can't be hallucinations, So, let's take a look at the people who are telling you they're hallucinations. Psychiatry. Okay. You might think that, schizophrenic suicide at a rate of 3 to 5 times that of the normal population. So you might think that their suicide rate would say something about the stability of the population. Okay. Now, according to the Journal of American Medical Association, the suicide rate is equivalent for psychiatrists to that of schizophrenics. So 65 out of 100,000 psychiatrists are 5.9 times that of the general population. The priests of mental health are suiciding. What does that tell you? The Journal of Clinical Psychiatry in 1980 did a 5-year study of 18,730 consecutive physician deaths by suicide and found that psychiatrists suicide regularly year by year at rates more than twice those expected, and that this difference was statistically significant.
Do you think that these negative entities are sucking the energy from the psychiatrists?
I think these negative entities are telling the patients that psychiatrists are dangerous, don't know what they're doing. They don't want to take their meds. The non-compliance rate for these non-psychiatric meds is awful. I think the other thing is psychiatrists realize they're not curing anything. They're just treating symptoms. They're just suppressing symptoms. They're not curing these people. They're charging them massive amounts of money for office visits and horrible. I mean, the costs for these drugs are astronomical. In the United States, it costs $800 to $1,000 to stay sane for 1 month on these antipsychotic drugs that don't cure anything. Mm-hmm. You can go across the border to Mexico and get a month's supply for $75. So that's how big a ripoff they are. So
not just that, Jerry, it's also that in a mental health facility, you spend all your time locked up. The only time you actually do go out a door is to smoke a cigarette, or in fact, they used to just smoke in the facility when I worked there. I don't know if that's changed now, and the food in hospital isn't fit enough to give to the pigs. So,
yeah,
when they should be getting fresh vegetables and getting a nice what I'd call an alkaline diet, which I thrive on. I wouldn't I win the spiritual battle because I eat, I keep my body 7.25 alkalinity. And I know for a fact that these doctors have no clue about that. They don't know, because I've said to my GP, she said, "Oh, do you often get sick?" I said, "No, I never get sick. I'm alkaline." She's like, "What?" She didn't know that the body has a pH level.
No.
and it, I'm not laughing at my doctor. I'm sniggering at the brainwashing system that these people are put through.
It's incredible. It's incredible. I mean, when I got out of school, I wasn't prepared for the reality of what mental illness was at all. Mm-hmm. I kept thinking, okay, I finished undergraduate school. I didn't find any answers there. I'm looking like, what makes these people crazy? What is mental illness? What drives this? There were no answers there. So I went, well, maybe they're hiding the answers in a master's program. So I applied to a master's program in counseling and rehabilitation, and there weren't any answers there. I mean, there was counseling stuff which worked. How to make the patient feel they were understood and how to listen and that kind of stuff. But as far as what caused mental illness, it wasn't there. So I figured, okay, they're hiding it in the PhD program. They only give it out to PhD students. So I applied to one of supposedly the best in the country, stayed there two years until I started getting sick. And there were no answers there either. It was piled higher and deeper. They were, there was these flaming egos there, that they had no answers. All their stuff was based around this DSM, and some of the diagnoses in this DSM, this Bible of fabricated mental illnesses, they had something called a mathematics disorder there. They got caffeine intoxication disorder. They got sibling relational disorder. They got sexual orientation disturbance, homosexuality. They got the Florence syndrome, being overwhelmed by beauty, such as Florence, Italy, fainting and dizziness, and they treat it with antidepressants. The Paris syndrome, mostly Japanese patients visiting France. Symptoms include anxieties, feelings of persecution. Any normal people would label cultural shock. I mean, these are actually diagnoses that they put in this Bible of theirs that they worship as these are real mental illnesses. It's all fabricated. It's all made up. It's segments of human behavior that they pathologized, and now they're selling drugs based on it. The insurance companies need a DSM diagnosis 303.10, subcategory 7 or something like that. They need that to pay these people. You know, so they're driving up the medical costs with this fraudulent DSM of theirs. It makes it look like they know something, but they don't know anything. You know, the mental health system is driven by greed, control, and profit. And if you look at the sales, so considering that none of these drugs cure anything, they merely tamp down symptoms. The global antipsychotic sales, global, have soared to 14.54 billion in 2021 billion, and estimated to increase to 15.5 billion in 2022. This is despite the fact that they only treat symptoms and they cure absolutely nothing. The drug companies are making $15.5 billion on selling crap that cures nothing. The antidepressant market is expected to reach 15.98 billion by 2023. Now, the worst thing they're doing is drugging the kids. I mean, they are increasing the drug right now in the United States. There's 7.2 million kids on psychiatric drugs. What do you think these things do to kids? You know, if they're rotting out the brains of psychotic patients, what are they doing to kids? And this is permanent long-term damage. And they're not saying anything about it. They don't tell the patient or the parent, these drugs are dangerous. Oh, they're safe. They're safe. You know, as of 2017, and it's higher now, there's over 1 million kids in the United States under the age of 6 on psychiatric drugs in the United States. 622,723 are under the age of 5. 80,235 are on amphetamines for ADHD. And I don't know how many prisoners I saw end up in prison where those Ritalin and what was the other one they give wasn't enough. So they moved up to taking street drugs and ended up in prison. You know, 38,000, 389,558 are in anti-anxiety drugs. 38,143 were on antipsychotic drugs. These drugs that destroy the brain, you know?
Yeah, people don't get it though, Jerry, do they? When they get something from a doctor, they're led to believe that it's completely the right thing, that it's definitely in their best interest, and that there's no harm that will come of it. And of course, there's always payback for what you do to your God-given body or your universe-given body, which many people would argue should be pure. I do wonder if some of these poor souls that do suffer,
there's usually trauma behind it.
Yeah.
There's usually massive trauma, physical trauma, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, or drugs like meth. That belies it. Now, they're not doing anything to treat that. There's only one psychotherapy out there that I know of that gets in there and uses a spiritual component. So that's the other thing. All these things, they're devoid of spirit. So humans are spiritual beings. So they're treating spiritual beings with these toxic physical drugs. They're not, thoughts are energetic. Memory is energetic. Traumas are energetic that are stuck in the mind. They're not touching those. They're spiritually devoid, treating the body as if it's a physical machine or mechanism, and it's not. So that's why they're failing. So let's take a look at how well they're doing in the United States. Considering that there are more psychiatric drugs on the planet right now than there ever have been in the entire history of the world. Big Pharma has taken over. They're flooding the market with tons of psychiatric drugs. Okay. Here's the result. CDC reports that 132 people in the United States are killing themselves every single day. Every day, despite all the antidepressant drugs in the world. Suicide is the 11th leading cause of death in the United States right now. Are these drugs doing any good? In 2021, 48,000 Americans killed themselves. 48,000 in 1 year. 50,000 died in Vietnam over 10 years. Every single year, 48,000 Americans are killing themselves. What does that tell you about our mental health system? It sucks. It doesn't work. It's useless. This drugging people is crazy. You know, between 2000 and 2018, suicide rates increased by 37%. You know, between 1999 and 2019, the suicide rate in the United States increased 33% despite the massive increase in sales of antidepressants. 24 veterans a day are killing themselves. Between 2006 and 2016, the suicide rate increased by 2% a year, with 1.4 million suicide attempts in 2017 and 47,000 deaths. According to the Center for Disease Control, the U.S. suicide rates have reached the highest level since World War II. Now, how does that look as an effective mental health system? These are the results these clowns are getting. They're flooding the market. They're flooding us with drugs, and this isn't working. Now, there is one mental health therapy that's come out. It's called the MACE energy system. It was developed not by a psychiatrist, not by a psychologist, not by anybody who had anything to do with the big pharma controlled educational institutions. It's this fella and his cohort are from Australia. This guy was a master mariner and a ship captain. He drove these big freighters, but he was a genius, and he was self-educated. He read everything. He was interested in the mind. He came up with something called the MACE energy system, which I've been using in my private practice now for 2 years. It gets in there, it goes to the cause of the trauma, and within an hour it's gone. It's gone.
Can you explain how it works, Jerry, for those of us that don't?
What Mace found was that the mind isn't what you think it is, and it's not what the educational institutions are saying it is. He said the mind, all it is a stimulus response mechanism, like a computer keyboard. All it does is take pictures of where you focus your attention. So wherever you focus your attention, it takes pictures of that, and it feeds those pictures to the spirit. Now, what is normally considered the mind is the spirit. So it's not the mind that does the rationalization and the analyzation and hears and thinks and feels. No, he says the mind only takes pictures of where you place your attention. But he also found out that he was like, okay, if you concentrate on a trauma long enough, they found that it starts dissipating. The problem was, well, how do you find it? How do you find where the trauma is located in the mind? Because the mind it's not tangible. You can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't hear it. The mind is not the brain. Nobody's ever found a thought in the brain. Nobody's ever extracted a thought from the brain. The brain's like a radio receiver. You turn it to a certain frequency and it picks up what you hear is the frequency you turn to. So, with meth and psychotics, that frequency is very low. With spiritual people, meditators, it's very high. What Mace found was that the spirit can help you locate where these traumas are found in the mind. Okay. And he also found that if you have the spirit or the being of the person concentrate on a negative thought, feeling, emotion, or concept, that energy moves from negative to positive, not the other way around. Okay. So the spirit or the being is inherently positive. It's the God spark in the person. It will absorb negative energy. And the attention is the wire that feeds it from the negative to the positive. Okay, so he found that if the person, they will ask the person to form a feeling into a picture. All right, first picture that comes to their mind. All right, it's got to be the first one. So here's this list of symptoms the patient's having. Turn that into a picture. As soon as they have a picture, that's where it's located in the mind. All right, so then it starts filling with negative energy. As if they concentrate on it, that negative will pour into that image. Okay? That image will expand. Right? If they keep their attention on that image, that attention is the link between the negative and the positive energy, and the spirit will absorb that energy, you know, through the attention of the victim. And that, if they keep their attention on it long enough, that trauma will dissipate. The energy will be out of it. They will still remember the trauma, but it will no longer affect them. There won't be a reaction. There will be a response. So everybody has, somebody they hate. That's what they call a negative identity. It's stuck in the mind, and every time one of those people come around, it causes a reaction. You'll either fight with them or you run from them. This system is great about going in there and getting that out of there. Usually it results from an abusive parent or some form of trauma that somebody else has inflicted on you. This system can go in there and just get that out in an hour. It's gone. You'll never react to those people again like that. It gets at the cause of the mental illness. That's why Mace labeled it causism. Now, they've taken this system and they've showed it to universities in Australia, which is where this guy's from, and they've ignored it. They want to keep running this scam that we just described here. They've taken it to the legislature in Australia. They demonstrated that it works, and they just passed it over. The big pharma is not going to want this coming out. They don't want something that cures illnesses. They want to keep selling their toxic drugs. They don't want anybody to hear of this. The Mesa energy system.
Mm-hmm. It's not just big pharma, though, is it? I mean,
it's the educational institutions too that are being paid off by big group.
Yeah, they control everything. I mean, they control the education,
right?
That makes doctors come out and not realize that maybe big pharma isn't everything. They control the teachers in school that teach the kids, if you're ill, go and see your unquestionable, and don't question your doctor.
Don't question the doctor, yeah.
And
so that's the same thing. You go into a psychiatrist, you don't question him, and he's giving you these toxic drugs that cause horrible side effects and telling you they're perfectly safe.
Mm. Can you give us some examples of, what kind of intrusive thoughts did your patients have?
Oh, it's everything negative under the sun. You're no good. You're ugly. You're stupid. Your parents don't love you. They're only faking like you love you. You don't have no friends. Nobody likes you. I mean, anything that will cause a negative emotional response, they will feed to the patient.
Mm. Did you get any that thought it was all a big conspiracy?
What was a big conspiracy?
Life, or everything.
Yeah, everybody's plotting against you. The government's sending thoughts into your head.
Yeah,
it's anything that will cause a negative emotional response. That's what they feed off of.
Mm.
And if you starve them out, and there's ways to do that, you can actually starve them out.
Yeah, I would imagine getting fit and healthy and in a happy environment and breathing fresh air and some moderate exercise. And because the one thing I teach people about winning the spiritual battle and is something you physically have to do if you want to win it. And that's
a big component.
Yeah, and that is you can't have a barrier between you and spirit and you and energy.
Right.
And any substance, whether it's alcohol, marijuana, it cuts you off from spirit, and it puts you in this, almost like a cocoon. And after a while, you see that cocoon and you start to learn to resent it because you want the good stuff, which is the spirit. The good spirit folks, not the evil ones. It's a tough one, actually, because a lot of people just are not prepared to make efforts in this area. They want to keep drinking their 2 bottles of wine a night. They want to keep eating their abundance of refined carbohydrates, starchy foods that just fill you full of acid and kill your crystal. It's such, and people have to come to me. I'm a thick ex-Marine, right? And I'm having to teach people what you should be taught in school and by your parents.
Right.
But bless them, of course your parents don't know because they come from even more brainwashed. They didn't even have internet. They had no chance.
Yeah.
Jerry, it's crazy. What do you think is the answer?
Well, I think the answer is realizing what's going on. First of all, that these voices that schizophrenics hear are not hallucinations. You know, they run all those patterns, and anybody who's working with schizophrenics can see this for themselves. All they got to do is open their eyes. It's not hidden in any genetics lab. It's not hidden in this fabricated chemical imbalance bullcrap that they put out there. I mean, it's right in front of your eyes. All you got to do is look. You can go to my website at jerrymarzinski.com. Okay, you go to the articles section. There's a whole list of these patterns that they run. Okay.
Yeah.
I am in private practice. You can sign up there. This book that Sherry and I wrote. Now, Sherry heard voices herself when she was young. This talks about how we found that these voices were actually entities. So one of the biggest scams that psychiatry is pulling on the entire world is that these voices are hallucinations. These things are malicious, evil entities. They feed off of us. And they don't just hit schizophrenics, they hit us all. You know, you could be walking down the street one day and all of a sudden this horrible thought comes into your head. It's nothing you would ever do. There's nothing you'd ever act on. And you go, where did that come from? You know, you don't find psychology asking, where do thoughts come from? Where did they originate? They don't even address that. You know, that was discovered by Emanuel Swedenborg, a Christian mystic, some 300 years ago. And the answer to paranoid schizophrenia is that where thoughts come from. They don't come from you. Your brain is the radio. It picks up those thoughts. Nobody's ever found a thought in anybody's head. They come in from the outside. And where you put your attention is where you're tuning into. You know, if you put your attention on amphetamines and drugs and all that kind of stuff, that's the vibrational level you're tuning into. You know, if you tune into a higher spiritual level, you go up to yoga and meditation and spiritual stuff, you're tuning into a much higher vibration. But these things want to keep you down. They don't want you doing that.
It's kind of crazy. I mean, I can understand how the sort of average person out there must probably be a bit baffled by this whole notion, but I can make it really simple. When in my life, all I did was sort out substances, because that's how I live my life. My life just gradually descended into utter chaos. The negative energy I attracted meant that not only did I nearly lose my life on several occasions, and you know, and I was hurting other people through some of my behaviors, but I descended into a disheveled mess, the complete sort of opposite of what I was like just a couple of years previous. And well, here's
what were you thinking at that time? What kind of thoughts were going through your head at that time?
Do you mean my thoughts, or do you mean the psychotic thoughts? Because I had, you know,
so you could tell the difference.
Yeah, I had in my book. You'd be fascinated, Jerry, to read this. I'd send you a copy, but you probably just better get to grab one on Amazon, because I just explain exactly what happened. So I had like my thoughts, my regular thoughts, or you know, wherever they come from, and then I had what I call in the book the voice. And it's not as mysterious as it sounds, folks. It was my voice.
That sounded like you.
But I wasn't in control of it. It just kept chipping in with these ever increasingly bizarre suggestions and ideas, and like Jerry saying, you know, very negative. Everyone's talking about you. You've got to crawl across this cable between these buildings. That'll do it. Go on, son. You can do it.
And you've hit two things that schizophrenics struggle with, and some of them never come to account. One is that voice sounds just like the thousands of other thoughts that go through your head on its separate day. It sounds just like you're thinking. There's no change in timbre or going. No, it sounds just like your regular thoughts.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're told from the time you're born that any thought that comes into your head belongs to you. That's a lie. No, not all thoughts belong to you, and you could tell that. And the way to tell them apart, that schizophrenics struggle with that. Any negative thought about yourself or anybody else comes from the dark side. If the intent is malicious, it comes from the dark side. So that's one way they can ferret out which comes from them. But a lot of them struggle with, like you were saying, that sounds just like you, and you're told it is you, but it's not.
I only worked this out, Jerry, through reflection afterwards. And it was quite an extended process. And I'll tell you the reason why. When I ran out of meth, which let's just say would be kind of every 3 days, maybe a week.
Did the voices tell you where to go and get it?
No, the voices disappeared. I would wake up a disheveled, starving, tired mess, I mean, starving like you never can, like ravenous.
Yeah, you're not hungry on meth.
Ravenous. I would buy raisin bread and condensed milk and just make condensed milk sandwiches, and I would scoff that as fast as humanly possible, like a wild dog. I couldn't shove it into my mouth fast enough. But anyway, I'll get off the point. The point was...
And what were those voices telling you?
Well, they'd gone by this stage. When I'd wake up, they'd gone, and I wouldn't think... I think...
What were they tell you while they were there?
Oh, while they were there, it was a lot of stuff. I was in the market in Wan Chai in Hong Kong, which is kind of like, Bruce Lee town. And I was looking to buy a blanket because I'd got this new place and there was nothing in it. And anyway, I picked up this blanket from a shop window. It was an open shop window, and it actually had this word on the label. I was looking for a price, and it just said waste. Okay. Unless this was some mega hallucination. I mean, it just genuinely said waste. Don't ask me why, or at least it looked like it. Perhaps it was Chinese writing and I was hallucinating. I don't know. But anyway, in that moment, Jerry, I was utterly convinced by this thought that came into my head, this like thought structure, that these were the blankets that the American settlers had given to the indigenous Indian community, like infected with smallpox or something to kill the Indian, right? I know that story's been disproved. That's not the point, folks. I'm talking about what was in my mind in Hong Kong like 20, 25 years ago. It was oh my God, these are those blankets.
Now, did you know that was a hallucination at the time, or was it so real that you got
it was 100% real. In that moment, I realized I was in some huge conspiracy. I was actually in a conspiracy because I worked in a nightclub as a doorman, a bouncer, and the nightclub was run by the 14K triads, which just compounded everything, because the triads, they communicate through hand signals and, gestures that most wouldn't see, almost a bit like sort of quote unquote Illuminati kind of stuff. And I become utterly convinced that I'd fallen down a rabbit hole, and I was looking up the street. And I thought, yeah, that guy leaning against the light, he knows it. And this woman in the shop, she knows it. Oh God. And I mean, I even went to work that night, and that kind of particular psychosis those psychotic thoughts just kind of like drifted away. And I went back to, living my life, and then they would just come on. I'm guessing when I was more tired than anything else, I was probably more subject to having them enter my head. But I could while away hours, Jerry. For example, sat on the floor. I lived on this top floor apartment in a 20-story high rundown tenement building. In fact, when I went back to Hong Kong, it was so old they'd pulled it down. And I used to just sit on the floor. I trashed the whole place, not intentionally. I never could get stuff done. So anytime I got some rubbish from the 7-Eleven, it would end up on the floor, and then I would try and like tidy this, and I'd end up just getting so fixated on, say, a newspaper article about triads, and I'd be like, oh, the triads have done this week. I wonder if that's to do with this global cult thing that I've uncovered, and I could end up spending like maybe 12 hours sat in that spot, not drinking anything, certainly not eating anything, not talking to anyone, just fixating on books. And I started to believe that, like, there was it was a bit confusing. I started to believe there was a foreign triad made up of all the Westerners that I knew. It's just they weren't telling me they were members of it. And it gets confusing because allegedly there actually was a foreign triad in Hong Kong. And I had people saying, come on, Chris, have you got it yet? And I would just like interpret that as, this is me now, my thoughts going, got what, dude? What are you, why don't you just tell me what, like, you know, is this some kind of initiation into this cult like club that I've got to guess what all these clues mean? And people would come up, and I mean, I had a guy I knew. He come into my nightclub one night, he had a bottle of champagne, and because he knew he couldn't drink it in the club, he went, there you go, mate. And I'd shoplifted a bottle of champagne for this guy's birthday like 2 months before, because I was skint, you know, I was in survival. I'm not justifying stealing stuff here, folks. I'm just telling you how it was. You know, I had to steal my food. It's just how it was. And in that moment, Jerry, I was just like utterly convinced the guy was taunting me, going, I knew you stole that bottle of champagne for my birthday. You know, it was something like this. And it just got bizarre. It got so bizarre, but the actual psychotic bits could manifest as me staring out the window in my crummy apartment, looking down 20 floors into a courtyard of a restaurant below. And I remember staring at cats for about 6 or 7 hours. And I was absolutely convinced these cats were puppets. And the way they moved, which was like, it was like these cats were on strings. And the guy chopping meat out the back of the restaurant, it was like he was automated. You know, and I'm like, he's on strings too. Wow, puppets. Where did puppets originate? Asia, wasn't it? There was that film on telly. It was The Year of Living Dangerously. Was it Mel Gibson? It was about puppets and stuff in it. Oh my God, is the whole of Hong Kong a puppet show? Oh, bet the whole, and I'm hearing car horns are going in the street, and I'm like, part of the puppet show. They're all communicating with each other through, you know, and everything became as though the whole of Hong Kong was like a pinball machine, all hooked up together, and stuff would happen there. Yeah, I get it. Oh, you know. Sorry, dude, you know, I walk out in front of a car and the guy would be like, you know, and I'd be like, I know you're not really angry. This is all part of the mystery I've got to solve. There's another piece. And of course, I never actually got anywhere. I just got more and more confused to the point where
look at that. It's all the first pattern. All those things are tied to negativity and paranoia and plots. Yeah, you didn't have any good thoughts. It wasn't like, oh yeah, I feel like I'm elevated, I'm
No,
spiritual, I'm moving toward God. It's all negatives. So what holds it on such a negative trajectory?
I
I mean,
I
something
actually
does.
I actually did have one good thought, but it was still a psychotic thought. When I look back, I was such a damaged kid. I mean, I really was. I don't want to sort of bore people with it, but I was just a massively damaged child. And when I look back, it was like, even though I had more self-confidence than anybody I knew, I was not afraid of anything, and nobody told me what to do. And I would, I was Royal Marines Commando. I passed out with the toughest military force on the planet. There was never that was never an issue. My issue come that deep down inside, I was unloved, and I felt like nobody loved me. If anything, they were all ridiculing me, which by this time a lot of people were, because they didn't know I was ill. They just thought I was being strange. And it was the rejection. That was it. It was the rejection that I suffered as a kiddie that was driving this thing.
See, that's what Mace gets in there and goes, and it disassembles that. So it's a decision you made as a kid that's been driving your whole life. I mean, and I see that all the time with the people I work with. They made a decision during a trauma 30 years ago, and that decision has steered their lives the entire time, because they weren't aware that it existed, because those negative traumas like that, they're not put there consciously, they're put there subconsciously. So when a trauma happens, it's a bad feeling associated with it, and your ego takes it and goes, well, let me handle that, and it takes it and it buries it in your subconscious, and then it takes energy to hold it there. So the whole time it's like a negative energy ridge where that thing's pushing to get out, and you're having to hold it in. So anybody who threatens that causes a reaction. So anybody who comes and goes, yeah, you're unlovable, a boom, it'd be an explosion. It's like a hypnotic program waiting to activate. And what it appears like is these negative entities hang around those programs, and when they're set off, they actually pour gasoline on the fire. So they feed off of that. People don't realize that they're surrounded by negative entities all the time, and that these thoughts, every once in a while, they get in their head. Like, what was it last year? I'm in Tucson, Arizona. We don't cut lawns here. We get a machete and cut the cactus down, to keep it from getting all over the place. And I have a beautiful husky, white husky, female husky. I'm out there, chopping these cactus, and she runs by. She didn't do anything to bother me. And all of a sudden I get this thought come through my head to chop her head off. And I'm like, what? Where'd that come from? That's not my thought. What, but it felt bad just having it. These kind of thoughts don't come from you, and everybody has them. They're not just the province of schizophrenics. Everybody gets these thoughts, and they don't belong to you. Every negative thought about yourself or anybody else does not belong to you.
Folks, give us some feedback on this. Please give the video a like. I mean, come on. Who the hell else is talking about this kind of stuff? The name of your book is An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind. Right. We'll put a link below, folks. Grab a copy of that.
My website is jerrymarzinsky.com. Yeah. That's MARZINSKY. And there's a lot more information on that site. If you go to articles, we've got scores of videotapes all on this subject. I mean, and this is not stuff that the psychiatric mafia is going to tell you.
No.
They want you to believe that all this stuff is your fault and it's all physiological. It's not. Thoughts are energy, memories are energy, and they're not dealing with anything spiritual. I never saw anything spiritual, and no. 4 years of undergraduate school, 4 years of graduate school, nothing spiritual there. I mean,
Well,
so
let's
this
say,
system is a spiritually devoid, expensive, duplistic system. The mental health
mm,
system, the Western mental health system, is a joke. It's a dysfunctional merry-go-round that just spins round and round and round and goes nowhere.
yeah, yeah, of course. We talk about this a lot, Jerry, on my channel. It's, you know, it's a big club. And one thing they do well is they don't even let people know about the spiritual battle. They keep them locked in a lower self, all their animal desires, and they suck in the energy from us. They're just like these demonic thoughts suck the energy from you. This lot, the word Satanist comes to mind, and it's that, folks. That doesn't have to be someone who dances around a blooming, a sheep. A late sheep, I should say. No, it's people that they know how to play their game. They know how to play their game, and once you see it, can't not see it, and this is why they'll lose.
You look at governments around the world. Look at how they're acting right now. If you look at that list of symptoms of schizophrenia, the patterns, and you compare that to what's coming across in the news right now, it's a 1-to-1 correlation.
Yeah. Exactly. It's insanity. It's not just governments. How many people, like tomorrow, are going to go and vote for a war? The massacre of innocent men, women, and children that they've never even met, and yet their mind is so unwell because they're controlled. It's crazy, Jerry. But once you see it, you can't unsee it, and so many people are waking up to this now that I think we've got it,
The mainstream media is completely controlled. You're not going to get the truth from them.
No, exactly,
none of them.
Exactly. Folks, if you can like and subscribe, really, really appreciate it. Massive, massive thank you to Jerry again. I can't wait till we have our next chat, and much love to you all. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.